Howdy folks, my name is MrStevenWolfe, and today we'll be reviewing Giantlands by Wonderfilled INC. Now before we begin, I wanted to give full disclosure on how this review came to be. Back in November of 2021, last year, Wonderfilled posted on Twitter that they had review copies available to the general public. I took my shot, received my free copy in January with the intention of finishing the review by the end of February. As for my current relationship with the company, that's become rather tenebrous. Early on, I was a vocal supporter of WFG, even at one point having to politely but firmly prove that I wasn't an employee or a sock account. However, as of February 18th, 2022, Wonderfilled has made the decision to sell NFTs of the artwork that they commissioned for Giantlands. I attempted to discuss this decision with them politely and in public, but they are, in no uncertain terms, sticking with this decision. That, combined with the hefty $130 entry fee for the first edition box set, or $200 for the signed first edition box set, gives me considerable reason to pause. Now, I've spoken to Mr. Steven Deinhardt, the head of Wonderfilled, and not only does he estimate that as 2022 continues, potential customers will have access to a significantly more financially approachable copy of the game, he'll also be releasing the first full expansion, Broken Roads. With that being said, I can't in good conscience discuss and review a game without bringing these situations up. I was directly involved in the online discourse, so I feel it's of key importance that I bring all this up from the beginning. I've made sure that my opinion of the company hasn't in any way colored my opinion of the game. Key thing being, the script was 80% done by the time all of this blew up. So, now that that's all out of the way, if you guys are still interested in my review and opinion of the game, by all means, stick around. Let's jump right into it. Giantlands is a science fantasy post-apocalyptic RPG set during a time called the Fifth Age, a period where beings from other worlds or alternate dimensions vie for control over a fractured but healing Earth. Inside the first edition box set, what I received for review are 3 books: The Spirit's Guide, the Player's Handbook; The Keeper's Guide, the DM's Handbook; and the Fifth Age Index, the Monster Manual. Also included in the box is a double-sided fold-out map of North America, 3 pre-filled character sheets and 1 blank character sheet, 4 double-sided ley tokens, part of the game's magic system, a pair of percentile D10s and a D4, a snazzy themed bookmark, and
the bouncer.
Giantlands utilizes a D100 system in which if you roll under the target number, you succeed. Rolling over, you fail. If you're a player out there who's familiar with Call of Cthulhu, RuneScape, or any of the plethora of Warhammer RPGs, you're already familiar with this engine type, usually referred to as a roll under D100 system. So as to not get lost in the weeds, I'll be breaking down my review into 5 key categories. The first is readability, the difficulty of simply reading and comprehending the system. The second is learning curve, not just the ability for a player to read the books involved and to understand it, but also the difficulty of a DM teaching the game to someone else or a group of someone else's. The third is crunch factor. Simply put, any and all math involved with the game and how complex it potentially is. The fourth is system depth. How deep does the rabbit hole of buffs, debuffs, armor, items, and that sort of jazz go? The final category is lore depth, the quantity and quality of the game's lore, if applicable. These categories are then given a rating, from simple all the way to esoteric. Now, don't get it twisted. A game that has simple lore or standard crunch isn't a bad thing. Many RPGs or war games flow perfectly well in the vein of, there's the keep, go fight stuff, add +2 to your roll. In the same vein, having esoteric depth or readability isn't bad either. Because some systems have so many variables, the writers chose to take the initiative and cover, well, everything. So let's get into it, yeah? I've got my actual script on screen right next to the camera, so if you see me blinking over here and there, it's because I'm trying to make sure that what I wrote is actually what's being brought to you. Our first category is readability. The books sit in a strange place for me. While they successfully emulate the writing style of first edition Dungeons and Dragons or even advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you can feel the writers slowly get more into the groove of retro RPGs as the books progress. By the time I got to the second book, the Spirit's Guide, the Keeper's Guide, it really feels like it's being written, not just an emulation of an older style or an update of an older gaming system. One of the things that stuck out for me in a weird way was an anecdote about character depth on page 27 of the Keeper's Guide. It describes a player, through no fault of their own, their character is killed, and so they make the decision of just writing "the second" next to their character's name and proudly proclaim to the table, "I shall avenge my father!" What's odd, though, is that that story has been rattling around the internet for decades. Now, referencing a D&D story or even a TTRPG story, perfectly fine. I do it all the time whenever I have conversations with people. However, rephrasing it specifically as if it happened at a Giantlands table is an odd choice. Overall, readability rating, standard. If you're familiar with any of the D100 roll-under systems already on the market, you'll be able to ease into Giantlands with minimal confusion or headaches. If it's your first experience with this type of system, getting into it's a little bumpy, but more than manageable. The features that make Giantlands unique is its resurrection system, the soul system, and the game's version of magic, ley energy. Now, assuming a character is tied to one of the chiefdoms, when they die, they can flip one of those tokens that came with the game, referred to as sigil coins. Assuming in-game the character is in possession of the matching sigil, they will regenerate at the chiefdom's temple, bereft of items, but they're alive. The important factor to note, however, is you only have 3 of these chances. There is no fourth life. The second unique system is ley. In-universe, ley is a series of natural energy lines that crisscross the planet. Mechanically speaking, ley is divided into 4 trees. On, the additive energy. On tends towards healing, illusions, restoration. Raw, multiplier energy. Raw tends towards arcane armor, repairing and upgrading items, armor and weapons, and exploration. Zo, subtractive energy. Zo tends towards combat and trickery. Literally, both pages of the Zo spells is, I light things on fire, I hit it up with electricity, these guys think I change shape. It's to the point. It doesn't mess around. The final branch is Ke, the divider energy. Ke tends towards buffs, debuffs, and team support. The available powers and abilities are thin but easy to understand and comprehend, with the main requirement being the character must be in possession of an appropriate sigil to cast spells from one of the 4 trees. Also, important thing to note, at no point in time does your character have to go out and hunt down unique or powerful versions of the spells. As soon as you are in possession with that medallion, you have full access to the roster of abilities that you can cast. However, almost all of those powers usually have an in-game 24-hour cooldown. Learning curve rating, standard. I know this section is going to seem a little short, but I promise it's not a bad thing. Approaching the math side of Giantlands, I was pleasantly surprised. Everything is clear-cut, it makes sense, and it fits together quite nicely. Being a D100 system, it has room to get incredibly nitpicky and minute when it comes to any numbers, but it manages to skirt that frustration quite cleanly. The math involved rarely dips into single digits, especially once you start getting better equipment. Overall, the math is surprisingly approachable. Crunch factor rating, standard. For me, here's where things take a bit of a nosedive. The collection of items, weapons, armor, and monsters is wildly inconsistent. The entire third book, the Fifth Age Index, is a monster manual, over 40 unique creatures. There's also a regional chart, so that while your characters are exploring the world, based off of where you are, you're likely to encounter different batches or bundles of beings. That's fantastic. Plus, icing on the cake, there's a build your own section. You want to duct tape in something unique and wild? You have that option. That being said, weapons, items, and armor are weirdly thin. The base clothing and armor sections have 20 items in total, 10 each. As for weapons, there's 10 melee weapons and 14 ranged weapons, all of the ranged weapons being some type of energy, handgun, or rifle. Now, I'm not demanding, expecting, or requiring Pathfinder-sized weapon charts, but a D100 system has more than enough room for pages of variety. In a post-apocalyptic, universe-hopping setting like Giantlands, there's practically limitless room for weapons and armor. When I first cracked the spine on the books, I was almost expecting something akin to Turok or Corvus Belli's Infinity in terms of variety and creativity. And sadly, we didn't get that. The core thing that both confuses and frustrates me the most is the lack of items and equipment. We barely get 12 items, and it's all combat or dangerous encounter equipment. The most non-combat item that you get is a backpack that improves your armor rating and a water-based fire extinguisher. Everything else is combat equipment. There's no rope, camping gear, survival gear, food rations, none of that. We don't even get healing items. Even though they're hinted at in the Keeper's Guide, specifically page 27 again. Now, while the book says it intends for players to have a fun and creative time, by all means, there's nothing wrong with that. I know there are scores of players out there that love crunchy little details like, well, yes, while we're in town at Ikamu, we're going to be stocking up on supplies and equipment for the long journey back to the surface. Or if someone's doing a Fallout RPG, like, yes, we're going to stock up on rads and food and water. That way we can make the long journey to Rivet City. There are people out there that adore crunchy details like that. So having that option for players to really explore and get into, it doesn't make sense that that option isn't there. Giantlands is based off of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, D&D First Edition. D&D First Edition required an entire supplement, Outdoor Survival, just to play it correctly. I don't understand why those options aren't there. It's oddly limiting. Now, that being said, things do perk up, no pun intended, when you flip over to the mutations chart. When you first make a character, and during gameplay at the DM's discretion, you gain mutations. One of 20 potential powers that can take your character that much more above and beyond adventurers, citizens, bad guys and monsters, and that sort of thing. Little things like, yeah, I regenerate slightly more health, or massive things like I can just use more magic. They're actually a pretty cool variety of mutations, perks, in the system. Players also have a selection of 9 playable races and 7 classes. The playable races are an eclectic mix of beings, 3 of which are technically lumped under the same being type, the morph. Essentially animal and human hybrids that Mother Gaia, who caused this whole mess in the first place, was like, I want Hawkman and Hawkgirl to be a thing. Let's go. Not even kidding. Like, the artwork literally looks like Hawkgirl. It's fantastic. The classes are a relatively standard affair, with players being able to multi-class as desired, and a max of 10 levels per class. Soldier, healer, explorer, that sort of thing. Overall, the selection of races, classes, and perks is hampered by the item selection. It doesn't gel together the same way similar or even older offerings do. System depth rating, standard. This part of the game confounds me. There is a great deal of surface depth, details that suggest to and hint at the larger world of the Fifth Age. If you've played any of the Dark Souls games or any From Software game, period, that's what I mean by surface depth. You'll get an item description that describes a person, or a conversation will hint at a culture or character creation. Little things like that, that'll hint at the larger world. But in the books, these lore details aren't explored. For that matter, they are barely present. Entire chiefdoms are hinted at worshipping giants, and they're just not discussed or elaborated upon. Rituals of ley energy and channeling are barely mentioned. Mother Gaia herself, the great being that was wounded by the advancements of man and then decided to just absolutely ruin everyone's couch and start things over, is maybe mentioned in passing 10 to 20 times in the entire boxed set. It feels as if all of this lore does exist. Like, there is a continuity Bible out there somewhere, and it's being held back from paying customers. It is genuinely frustrating how much is hinted at. Like, the massive North America map that comes in the box is sprinkled with named locations and settlements and regions, and there isn't doodly squat about any of them in any of the books. The very end of the Keeper's Guide gets me the most. I kid you not. It has the absolute gall on the last page to just casually mention space travel, time travel, and dimension hopping. Barely a paragraph of words in total. Kid you not. Right at the start. In the Fifth Age, space travel is common, at least for some. Intergalactic trade routes flourish, and visitors from other worlds arrive periodically. What? It's like someone duct taped Firefly to Turok and forgot to tell the continuity department. I don't want to assume the worst. What is the purpose of mentioning these potentially massive details only to move along like a derailed train covered in butter? What does that achieve? It's a tease, and it's not a nice one at that. I don't understand. I genuinely don't understand that. Lore depth rating, simple. When all's said and done, Giantlands is a frustrating offering. I genuinely believe this game has heaps of potential, but with the behavior of the studio and its owner, I can't say for certain if these design decisions and missteps are an accident or on purpose. And frankly, I shouldn't be thinking that. If there's soft spots in a tabletop game or a war game, something has gone terribly wrong if the player is trying to figure out whether missing or half-baked content is a bug or a feature. In closing, if you can eventually find a PDF of Giantlands, or if the box sets ever drop below $80, I'd say give it a shot. Knowing how creative most of the DMs in my local area alone are, homebrewing in weapons, armor, items, places is a cinch in such a blank slate setting like this. But I'm sad to say, until that day occurs, I can't recommend this game. And that eats at me because of how much potential it has. And because it's such a unique offering to the TTRPG community. Recently, there's been this resurgence in retro-styled video games. They tell fantastic stories with chunky graphics or older game engines. There's an untapped market with that sort of style, but tabletop games. Giantlands on the surface has the opportunity to kickstart an entire genre of retro-style RPGs. But unfortunately, we'll have to wait and see if they actually do anything with it. Well, thank you for watching to the end, folks. I'm sorry to be the bearer of disappointing news. If you enjoyed this video, would like to see more of my content in the future, by all means, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I'm doing what I can to make sure that I churn out a review at least once a month. Hopefully that will be improved as things go along. I want to do a mix of video games and tabletop games. It feels appropriate to the content that I enjoy and the content that I want to make going forward. Unfortunately, though, folks, we are out of time for today. So until we meet again, stay classy, Internet.